Hi everyone, in this video we will be looking into role-based access control, and also we will deploy a pod in the cluster which we created in the previous video. Um, so we deployed a cluster in the previous video, so I will show you that. So we have cluster up and running. Um, Now if you want to deploy a pod, so you can do that. Create pod minus image nginx. Command is incorrect. Command for creating pod is this. So let me create a namespace first. Um, Currently we have default namespaces. Get namespaces. So we have four namespaces. If you don't specify a namespace with the minus namespace option, so by default everything will be done in the default namespace. So what I'm trying to say is if I create a pod um, with this command, so it will be created in default namespace by default. And if you want to create a pod in a specific namespace, so then first of all you need to have your own custom namespace. Try not to deploy some things in these because these are uh, control plane namespaces. These are running services which are essential for the cluster. So I'm creating a namespace with the name databases, and now I will create a pod inside this namespace. And if I get all pods once again, you can see nginx pod is in pending state. Um, so there is some issue. That is the reason it is in pending state. So you can try to debug using describe command, kubectl describe pod. And if you see in the bottom, in the event section, there is a warning, 0 out of 1 nodes are available. So basically the error here is we cannot create pods in control plane node. Um, so, so as there is no other worker node, so that is the error here. By default, you cannot create pods in uh, control plane node. Um, so to remove this restriction for single node clusters, we need to run a command named as untainting. So currently it is there is a restriction which is named as taint. So right now we are removing that restriction with this command. So you see now untainted. Now if you again run this, you can see both of the boards are now in running state. So by default you cannot run application or custom your own board in your single node cluster. Okay. Um, Now yes, that is one thing, how to create a pod in single node cluster. Next thing is uh, after like rebooting your virtual machine in which your Kubernetes is installed, there is a possibility that your IP address will change because of the DHCP. So for and our cluster is configured with the IP address um, which was initially used when we were creating the pod, creating the cluster. Um, so if this IP address changes next time or after reboot, so our cluster will stop working. Why? Because our API server address will change, and right now our configuration file, kubeconfig file, is pointing towards the IP address which was initially there for the ETH0 interface. So you need to make sure this IP doesn't change, basically. Um, so for that, you can disable DHCP server and configure the IP address manually or static IP address. I did that by going to the settings of GNOME. Then I went to the network section. Inside this, I clicked here settings, went to the IPv4 and configured the things manually here. So this now every time uh, this machine's reboot, this IP address remains exactly same. And gateway will be .2 if you are using VMware Workstation. Also, you can get this information if you don't know by going to the virtual network editor in your VMware Workstation. Then click on change settings here and go to your interface, network type, NAT settings, and you can see the gateway IP address here. So it is .2. Okay. Um, Next is we need to learn about role-based access control. So what is role-based access control? It is similar to identity and access management. If you come from a cloud background, maybe AWS, let's say. So in AWS, we have user groups, roles, and policies. Similarly, in Kubernetes, we have user groups. So we have user, we have groups, we have service accounts, uh, and we have something named as role. So role is kind of policies. These contain permissions. Role binding is the binding between your identity, that is user, and the role. So it is one-to-one mapping or one-to-many. So basically, it is a mapping between user or any identity with the policy. Um, there, so there is there are two types of role binding and roles. One is regular role binding and regular role. That is basically what that means is so these will be giving permissions for specific namespaces. Whereas there is something known as cluster role binding. So in cluster role binding, you can give permissions for multiple namespaces. Um, just remember the terms. It will make sense if it is not making sense right now. Um, I will be creating a new user just now. Um, so let's create a new user, and we'll see how to give permissions to this user to do some operations in the Kubernetes. So for creating a user, these are the commands. First step is we'll generate a key. So username is please subscribe. In my case, you can change any, you can choose any username of your choice. Doesn't matter. Um, so I'm generating a key with the name please subscribe dot key. You can see a key is generated using OpenSSL. Um, Next step is we are generating a certificate signing request. So we are giving the key as the parameter here, and output file will be please subscribe.csr. And in the subject section, we are mentioning common name as please subscribe, and this slash o is the group name. So group is databases here. So this user, please subscribe user, will be part of databases group. Next is this. So what is happening here is we are creating a certificate for our which is signed by the um certificate of Kubernetes cluster. So what I mean by that is if you go to this directory in your control plane node, you can see there are two files, ca.crt and ca.key. So this is certificate authority certificate, and this certificate authority key. This is generated when we create a cluster. So if you remember, when we created the cluster in the, I think I have a screenshot, yes. So when we created the cluster initially in the last video, in the last, we got this commands mkdir. To start using cluster, you need to run the following as a regular user. So what these three commands did is it created a configuration file in our user in our current user's home directory. And if I show you that file, the location of the file is in your current home directory in the .cube folder. The file name is config. So this is the configuration file which kubectl is using to connect to the API server. Um, and the things which you see here are, this is the um, base 64 encoded ca.crt, this thing, and this is the client or user certificate. That means um, so we created this certificate, so that is this for not for please subscribe user, it is for Kubernetes minus admin user. So this is the user which is created by default by kubeadm when we create a cluster. And client key data is again base64 encoded, this thing which we created for please subscribe user. Um, so basically we need to create a configuration file similar to this to be able to connect to the API server as please subscribe user. Um, so let's do that. Next step, after creating these three files, next step is to create a kube config file for this user. So command for, sorry, command for that is this, are these. The first is this. So what is happening here is we are generating a please subscribe.config file and we are setting the cluster name as please subscribe cluster. Um, I will show you how it looks like. So now if you see, there is a new file created, and if I show the contents, see the contents of it, you can see there is a name, please subscribe cluster. And if you see the default kubeconfig file, cluster name here is Kubernetes. Okay. Next is we will be configuring the API server IP address and port number. So now if I see, API server IP address and port number is configured. Next is we will be adding the certificate. Now if you see once again, this file is containing the certificate. So this is the Kubernetes cs.crt file. Okay, it is a base64 encoded. Next is we will be including um, our please subscribe user certificate and key inside the configuration file, and we are doing that by using configuration set credentials command. We are specifying a name here, it can be anything, and minus minus client certificate is our please subscribe.crt, and the client key is please subscribe.key. So this file minus minus embed certs will um, create a base64 encoded format and include the certificate inside the file itself. If you do not give this option, the certificate will be included as a will not be included in the file. It will be specified as a path. If I see these files once again, now client certificate data is populated, client key data is populated, and the things which are remaining is context. You see the default config file. There is something named as context. So we need to create that context now. For creating context, this is the command kubectl minus minus kubeconfig set context. See the file, context is added. Next is we need to use this context. So in the current context right now it is empty. We need to use the context which we just created. Now if we again see the file, please sub context is there. So that is pretty much it. We have configured everything which is required in the config file of the please subscribe user. Um, Now we should be able to connect to the cluster for checking your uh, config file is correct. You can run kubectl and version command. So it will connect to your cluster. So you can see we are able to get the version from the API server. So that means this file is good. It is working. Um, Next thing is we need to, let's say if we want to let's say get pods maybe. Okay, so we will be getting an error right now because our user is not having any permissions. Example config. So you can see please subscribe user cannot list resources pods in API group at the cluster scope. So basically our user is not having any permission even of listing pods. Um, so we will give permission to our user. Um, so for giving permissions, two things are required: role and role binding. So role will be defining the permissions, and role binding will be mapping of the identity with the permission. The first thing is we need to create a role. For creating role, this is the command kubectl. Uh, so what we are doing here is we are giving get. Get means reading, listing, create, delete for resource pods. So we are giving our user permissions. So we are creating a role with the permission of get, list, create, delete on pods for the namespace databases. A role with the name database manager is created. Now, next step is to create role binding. User will be please subscribe. Role is database manager. So this thing role binding will be mapping this user to this permission. Now if we get pods, if we run get pods again, it should work, but only for the namespace database. So minus minus namespace databases. So now we are able to list pods. We can create pods. We can delete pods. Um, that is how you create a user in Kubernetes and give permissions to that user. That is it for this video. Thank you for watching.